So welcome back to this series on recovery from childhood sexual abuse with a focus on abuse occurring within the family of origin. I'm Rebecca Coffey, and I'm thrilled to be here today with someone I consider a friend, and the amazing Dr. Stephen Farmer. He is a well-known author and psychotherapist and shamanic healer and practitioner. So the focus of this interview today is to talk a little bit about how we as survivors can use shamanic practices in our own life, in our everyday lives, to really, sort of ease out all that we've lived through, to help our nervous systems, and to even work to heal generational trauma. So no better person than to talk about this than Stephen Farmer, and Stephen has agreed to set our space and our container for us before we begin.
Great. Thank you, Rebecca. It's my pleasure, to be part of your series here. I think it's a wonderful gift that you're offering others. So thanks. It's an honor. And those of you who are listening in, if you would please just close your eyes, sit up in a comfortable position, but in a little straighter, good posture, but not stiff. And the reason for that is it helps you breathe a little bit more. And I'd like you just to take a couple of nice, slow, deep breaths, get centered, feet on the ground, floor, wherever you are. And the breath. And I want to thank Rebecca specifically for doing this. And I thank you for the blessings that we have in our lives in so many different ways. Thank you, Earth Mother, for your generosity and your ways of helping us sustain our lives, the lives of all beings that inhabit this planet. Thank you to our guides, our spirit guides, angels, archangels, ancestors, the elders of the ancestor world. Thank you for your blessing and your surround. Thank you to those spirit animals that have been so immensely helpful for any and all of us who work with spirit animals, that we call on them to provide a bubble of safety and protection at all times. And I want to put a particular shout out to Wolf Spirit. Thank you so much. And also to Ana Oto, the elder ancestor who has been with me my entire life. And I thank you for the blessing of this breath, of this heartbeat, of this opportunity to experience life, all of its ups and downs, and particularly thank you for the support that each one of us has had in our healing journeys. And we cannot express enough gratitude for all the support, whether we've been aware of it or not. It's always there, and thank you for that. It's these things we pray. Okay.
Thank you, Stephen. I always cry in your presence.
Thank you. I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. So the first thing I just want to clarify for our viewers is, what is shamanic healing, or what are shamanic practices? And when we talk about that, what do we mean? And just to give a little context, I think if we look around our world today, many organizations and individuals are really hearkening back to really practices that our ancestors used. And one example where we can see that is in our public school systems today. So our public schools across the United States, the disciplinary actions that we've used for years and years are not working anymore. And one in particular is expelling a student, like kicking a student out of the community when they have done something wrong. And so now schools are starting to employ what's called restorative justice. And so they're actually pulling from Indigenous practices to actually help repair relationship and rebuild community. And so we're seeing that more and more in our everyday lives. Now, for myself as a dance therapist, you know, a lot of the origins of dance therapy harken back to shamanic practices and ritual. And so when I came upon Stephen and his work, it fit really well with what I already felt I like to use in my own healing. But Stephen, would you talk about, you know, what's the difference between being a shaman and using a shamanic practice? Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. I have some pretty strong opinions about that. I don't consider myself a shaman. To me, a shaman implies something much more. It's used these days a little more glibly, and people, not that they are, but putting it on their business cards, etc. But I think there needs to be a respect for the traditions that really have brought shamanic tools into the current century. Not everyone that studies shamanism is aiming to become a shaman. Don't get me wrong, nor should they. Because I was trained by Michael Harner and his Foundation for Shamanic Studies, about almost 30 years ago, come to think of it. And I know I had a very active psychotherapy practice, and then I took a 2-day course, you know, and you think 2-day course, you know, I had no illusions I'm going to get it, I'm going to be a shaman after 2 days, you know, or 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 3 years. But there are some valuable tools that have come down the pike, you know, over the generations from indigenous communities and particularly shamanic communities. So I prefer to think of myself as a shamanic healer or shamanic practitioner. I've been trained well. I've gone, you know, I've had different kinds of training in these various modalities, and that's the beauty that Michael Harner did, who's ancestor now, but he brought a lot of these into what he called core shamanism, meaning there's some specific techniques, if you will, healing techniques that seem to run across the board. Example would be taking bad or negative energy out of someone, you know, and transforming it, you know, helping it transform. Finding a part of the soul of somebody that's been missing for a while. Things like ceremony, you know, sacred ceremony, that sort of thing. Those are things that they're not unique to shamanism, especially ceremony, but definitely as part of the practice and part of the mindset in whether shaman or shamanic practitioner, that's an important element. To go out like the new, you know, under the new moon, for instance, you know, and thank Grandmother Moon. Grandmother is a term that's accorded the elders of the ancestral world. And, you know, believe it or not, you know, the moon is an ancestor. But that we're talking, you know, beyond generations. We're talking thousands, even in some ways, millions of years. Anyway, back to your question. So that's a sketch of what the difference is. And then beyond that, if somebody calls himself a shaman, I'm not going to get tweaked about it. You know, it's my own opinion that we got to be really careful and respectful of that term. And I think it's gotten very diffuse, and it's lost some of its basic meaning. But the shamanic practitioner, shamanic healer, I have hundreds of people I know, you know, that are shamanic practitioners.
That's very useful. Thank you so much for that answer.
Sure.
So in this series, if you've been watching it for a while, you know that in each segment, I share a bit of my own journey as an incest survivor. And so the reason I brought Stephen into this particular video was because he was a part of my journey, a big important part. So, I first, and I'm going to tell a little bit about that path. So I first came to know of Stephen through his work as an author. So I have one of his books here called Sacred Ceremony, and he autographed it for me years ago.
Beautiful.
And so I lead a lot of women's circles now, and I often use this as a reference. And so what I found when I first started reading your work, Stephen, was that some of the things you wrote about, you just named things that I already felt. Like there were things, especially from childhood, that I really were really important to me when I was, real young, going through a very traumatic childhood. I really had relationships with the earth around me, and that was very important. And I think that's not unique to me. I think it's definitely probably the case for many people watching who were abused, especially in the home. So I'm going to give you an example of how you named something for me in your writing. So, I grew up and was abused within my family home. I had 5 abusers, and all my abuse occurred under the age of 5. So my home didn't, for my nervous system, it never felt like, oh, I'm home, but I was very lucky that I lived in a beautiful town, and I lived in a private neighborhood that had a private beach. And so from a very young age, everyone in the neighborhood knew me, and I could go down to the ocean very early in the morning, even before anyone was up. And I spent a lot of my childhood on these rocks, a little segment of rock, a rock formation on the side of the beach. And I spent hours there as a kid crabbing. And I remember my older siblings, they were much older, could swim to the raft, and I was too young. I couldn't go. So I would sit on the rocks, and those rocks became important to me. And I went to college on the West Coast, and I didn't come back to the East Coast for many years. And when I did come back to that beach and I sat on those rocks again, I had this experience where I just felt like, oh, I've come home. And I melted into the rocks, and I felt the rocks receive me. And it surprised me. And when I would take my shoes off, I could close my eyes, and my feet had memorized all the crevices, even though it had been years later. And I just felt, I love these rocks, and these rocks love me. And so I have here your Earth Magic deck, but you also have a book, Earth Magic. And when you named stone people for me, I was like, oh, that's my rock. Those are my rocks, And so I think for children who are traumatized at a young age or in the home, things like the family pet or the nature outside of the home becomes very, very important. When you're abused by someone who's supposed to take care of you, or someone that you're in relationship with, having relationships with others and being able to count on others is not always the safe place. So I think for children, who are traumatized young, I know Lucy Maud Montgomery, who wrote Anne of Green Gables, writes about this, she befriended the trees and everything else around her. And I think that's a common thing. And there was a way that we could comfort ourselves. And we found, we have a rich inner life. We had to survive. And I think also even now, if you're an adult survivor, we can really come back to these childhood things to self-soothe. We have to learn, we're PTSD survivors. We have to learn to self-soothe all the time, sometimes multiple times a day. And so the next question I have for you, Stephen, is, can you give us some suggestions about how we can call on, animal guides or, the spirits of the land or stone people to really help us calm our nervous system, to remember that we're not alone?
Really good. And I love your story. And I also have a tremendous respect for you, Rebecca, that you've really been called to plow into this, and do a lot of healing, from terrifying, situations. And terror is even a stronger word than fear when you're people who are supposed to take care of you. It makes me sad, it makes me tear up a little bit even. The people that are supposed to take care of you and provide as much safety as possible are the ones that are violating you in that way. So I think, Rebecca, you brought up a couple of good points. One is in both the physical realm as well as what you could say is the non-visible, ordinarily non-visible realm, the spiritual realm. I'm also certified as a somatic experiencing practitioner, as well as I'm not certified as a shamanic practitioner. There's nobody can certify you for that that I'm aware of, and if they do, I would, perk my ears up, and wonder about it. But one of the keys that came away from this 3-year training I did for somatic experiencing is how trauma lives in the body. You know, that we have adaptations that we just functionally do, you know, under the circumstances. As a child, we have no other recourse other than to adapt to the situation and the circumstance, you know, or get the hell out of there, you know, maybe when you're a little bit older. But what the 3 words that I think are really critical to recovery, whether you're working with shamanic healing, the non-visible, or the material realm: resources, resources, resources. And you mentioned some, like having a pet, you know, that can be very petting a cat, you know, can be very soothing. And one needs to acquire and find and discover ways that are self-soothing. What you mentioned about get out in the big one, natural world. You know, go for a walk in the natural world. Take your socks and shoes off unless it's really, really cold, and get your feet in the dirt. You know, look up at the stars. You know, see the stars. Look up at the moon. You know, get reacquainted. You know, if you've lost track of that, get reacquainted with all the beings that express themselves materially in the world. So, having said that, I think that's one of the most critical things is resources. Again, the physical resources. Yes, something self-soothing, music, dance, uh, uh, being silent. You know, finding a quiet space. You know, and I got to tell you, number 1 on the list, breath. You know, conscious breath. I should qualify that to some extent. There's a few different breathing patterns, but I'll give you and the listeners one that has been one of my favorites here for the last couple of years. And it's actually from, I believe, prana yoga, I think. Don't quote me on that part. But Andrew Weil, who has really brought it to the forefront. And I'll give him credit for publicizing that. And then I'm finding it all over the place, you know, in different 4-7-8. Remember that. 4-7-8. Here's the deal. Real simple. You breathe in on 4, count to 4. You hold it for 7. That helps your body absorb what you've just taken in. And then here's the key. Number 8, 4-7-8 is release to a count of 8. It's a very slow release because, again, it encourages and facilitates the absorption of oxygen. Yeah, and we need to do that. So develop a practice. There may be other ways too. There's a 4x4. I've tried it. I personally don't care for it, you know, that much, but some people really like it. And the other is, let's even make it more simple. Nice, slow, deep breathing. You know, just get into a rhythm of that. Do about maybe half a dozen of those slow, deep breaths like that, and that will help center you. The other thing I want to encourage is a very simple thing, and it's a posture. There's a tendency, because we got this big lump here on top of our shoulders, you know, since 200,000, at least 200,000 years ago. And that's the forward head posture, where the heaviness of the head starts to take over as we age. And we walk around, maybe you can see it here from the side. And what happens there is this closes down. So you lose the opportunity for a full breath. So sitting up, not rigid, and we're not talking about military, but just sitting up straight, lifting your head. I've sometimes said like angels are pulling your head up a little bit. You know, just practice some of that. And I think those are on the spot useful techniques. I hope I'm trying not to meander here too much. I tend to wander around a little bit and then get back to the point, Rebecca. So just call me out, or if you got a question or a comment to make, please feel free to do so. Okay, good.
All right. So now I'm going to tell the story of when I actually met you in person. So,
Okay.
so it was through Karen Polino, and she had a center in Pembroke, Massachusetts, and she had you come as a speaker. And then while you were in town for the weekend, you gave an opportunity for some people to work one-on-one with you. And when I look to work with someone, I like to pick someone who, you know, if they're doing sort of an alternative practice, it's always, I think, smart on my part that I always try to find someone who also has some grounding in the psychotherapy, who has checks and balances. And I often recommend that to others as well. And that's one of the reasons why I felt really attracted to work with you. And so I signed up first for just this one-on-one session. And I just felt like, okay, I think I need to do this. And that was in actually 2014. So like 9 years ago.
Wow.
I know. And so I remember, and I'm going to tell a little bit of what I remember from the session, and then maybe you can share a little after. But I remember I walked into the room with you and you didn't really ask me anything about myself, like other than how's your day or something, but I could tell that you were communicating with something, but not me, you know, or you were just kind of in the room and you were doing your thing. And then you told me, you said, this is what we're going to do. It's kind of like you got marching orders. And then you said, okay, this is how it's going to go. This is what we're going to do so that I would feel safe. Okay. And so what we did was we started to go in and journey. So like in a meditative space, but we could also, in my mind, and I felt like in your mind, we were journeying together. We were, you know, traveling together.
Mhm.
And I tracked right away. And I remember that you came across Wolf and you said something like, hey, Wolf, you know, and then a little bit later, hey, Raven, you know, and so they were with us. And, you know, Wolf has been special to me. So even at that time, I was really comforted, felt that Wolf was there as a protector, you know.
Yeah.
So what was so cool is you were actually going in to do, I didn't know it, but you were getting ready to do, to retrieve a soul fragment for me.
Hmm.
And so we traveled what seemed like going down and down and down. And you encountered this like dark room. And I knew exactly what you were hitting upon. I knew what age I was. But what was so interesting about this particular time of looking back in my trauma was that I had already recovered most of my recovered memories. And every time I had gone through that, it was very hard for me. And it was always alone. It was very like, it wasn't great experiencing it. But this time we were going back to a very, very traumatized time in my life. I was about 3 years old. And what was great is that you and Wolf went into the dark place for me. And I didn't have to go there. And it was like the first time I really felt that protective father energy. And I didn't have any of that growing up, you know? And so it felt like, wow, how wonderful. I have this protective Wolf and I have this father energy going in to say, you stay out here, we'll do it for you. And you went in and you got my little 3-year-old piece and brought her back. And I remember after we journeyed and you didn't tell me everything that was happening, but I could see it and I could feel it, you know? And after you said, okay, now you have to welcome her back. And that was really hard for me. It was really, really hard to integrate her back. And I remember you said, like, ask her what she wants, what will help her. And she wanted, what she said, she wanted a kitty. She wanted a cat. And I remember that night, it was kind of late when I left and nothing was open except a grocery store. But I went and I bought this cat and I still have it. And, you know, I do a ton of work, inner child work and stuffed animals. You know, when we say, you know, animal guides, it can be a picture of an animal. It can be a stuffed animal like that. Mr. Rogers knew what he was doing, you know, with the puppets. So yeah, so this was my cat and it really helped me connect to that 3-year-old. And what you didn't know, Stephen, when I came to do that is that it had just been a year prior that or not a year, maybe a couple years prior, I was in my dance therapy program and I had to do an internship at a school for the blind. So I had to work with kids that were blind and some of them were deaf. And I was totally fine working with the kids of different ages until we got 3 and under. And what's a common experience for sexual abuse survivors as children is, sometimes when they have children of their own, when their child is the age that they were abused, sometimes a lot comes up. So what happened for me is I was a student and I was doing an internship, and I had a wonderful supervisor and professor. And I said, look, I cannot be that one-on-one with those little kids. And what was coming up for me is anytime I looked at a picture of myself as a child 3 or under, I thought, I'm really gross. Like, that's a really gross picture of me. I just thought that. And I didn't want to be around these kids because the feeling was, these kids are gross. I don't want to touch them. They're gross, And so, like, what I had done, something horrible, horrible, horrible must have really happened when I was 3, because I left, like a part of me left. And I rejected that part of me. So like there's an internal part of me that became the rejector. And I was like, so that little part of me would come and be like, can I hang out with you? Can I be with you? And I would be like, no. So it was through that soul retrieval that you did, that you helped me to be able to welcome her back. And now I hang out with her all the time, and like, we are totally integrated. But that's really hard work to do. And so sometimes having something so dramatic, like a ceremony like that, is really useful. So I was wondering if you could talk about, you wrote a blog about this that I read, like, for a child who is traumatized, how does that happen? Why does that piece of soul leave? And tell us about soul retrieval.
Sure. It's again, I mentioned Harner's core shamanism was what I was introduced to with shamanism, and then finding out that for instance, soul retrieval, through various cultures, there is some concept of soul retrieval, and there's a particular way that I work with it, which is, first off, trust my guides. As a shamanic practitioner, over the years, I often say I've acquired these power animals, which are spirit animals to work with, but I'm beginning to suspect more and more these days that they acquired me, or even more so that there's this collaborative process that took place. So anyway, I always, I trust my guides immensely. They've worked me, they've saved my butt, on a few occasions. I just really have a deep trust, even more than faith. I've been thinking about those two words, and earlier today I was thinking about them, and there's something like really right in the gut about trust. Really being feeling safe and taken care of. You know what I'm talking about. And you've been able to overcome that deep well of fear and sadness, etc., of the fact that you didn't feel safe for many years. So again, I commend you. I keep coming back to that. I commend you and respect you for that, Rebecca. Soul retrieval. It isn't that I have a dear friend of mine who is a practitioner, and he has a different model for soul retrieval than what I use. He talks about the upper world, the middle world, and the lower world soul, and that's his gig, and it's just as effective. It's just a different way to approach it. What makes more sense to me, and I've literally done hundreds of soul retrievals over the years I've been practicing as a shamanic healer. Basically what it is, I trust my guides. My request, let's say I'm working with a client, my request on behalf of the client is take me to the soul fragment, as you mentioned, that most needs to be with this person right now. Again, trust, big word. And they take me to these areas in what's called non-ordinary reality. There, typically I am taken to a soul fragment. I could be anywhere. It could be 3 years old. It could be 12. It could be a major traffic accident that happened, a few years ago for somebody. When you described it well, it's like some part of you feels like it's left. Psychologically, we call it dissociation. We're out of body. We feel that sort of hazy, where am I kind of feeling. Well, that's also symptomatic of what we could call soul loss. And again, you're not losing your entire soul, but a soul fragment, from this particular paradigm, this particular model. So then I've made my request and my thank yous, and most of my prayers are thank yous. As those of you listening, you remember the opening prayer. A lot of thankfulness, a lot of gratitude, appreciation for those who help take care of me, and also that help me with this work, essential, to shamanic work. So I'm taken there, and then usually there's an inquiry that takes place. I get a visual in my mind's eye. I get a feeling, a sensation or emotional feeling of some sort. I start to dialogue with the soul fragment. Let's say I'm going to use a different example than 3. I'll use, so let's say an 11-year-old. Hey, what prompted you to leave? And then I'll get some information about that. And I probably, like in your situation, I didn't know, I didn't know. I went in totally trusting, and I've got the foundation for that. So I asked the 11-year-old, what happened to you? And my mom and dad left me, and I was all alone for like 3 days, and I didn't know what to do. Makes me a little sad as I say that, so I say, well, I'm here to take you back, if you're willing to go back. I'll take you back, and that way you can become whole again. You can become a part of Julie's overall soul. She misses you. What would you like on behalf, the reciprocity, for your willingness to return? And I'll take you back and sort of install you in the overall soul of this person, Julie. The 11-year-old part goes into the adult part. And what do you want from Julie? And Julie says, I want to play more. I want to go down to the playground and swing. And that's not uncommon, for a child soul fragment, just to want to play, lighten up, loosen up a little bit, So there's this mutuality that takes place there between the adult and the soul fragment that's now returned. And yes, the integration process can be a little rough at times. And there may be certain assignments that you have in order to integrate that soul fragment. That's all part of the process until you begin to really cherish. And often, younger ones, like the one that was retrieved for you, want an animal or a stuffed toy or something like that, because again, resource, it's a great resource, and it's a reminder, becomes actual and symbolic of the return, the retrieval or the return of that soul fragment. And I must say, Rebecca, and you're a good example of that, is that following up with someone who's had a soul retrieval, things are put into motion. Life changes that take place. It's actually a blessed miracle that, because of the work of hundreds, perhaps thousands of indigenous peoples who have developed this process over thousands, tens of thousands of years, really, that it is now something that's come into the consciousness of our contemporary culture. And we're at a place now, just a related comment, that there's both all of this destructiveness that's going on, on the planet, but there's also this elevation of consciousness that's going on. For example, being able to be taught some of these processes that can help us lead a more fully satisfying life.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And I do think it's good for my audience to see, which is survivors, to see that, we try so hard to heal ourselves. And like the biggest message that I think I could say to someone, in the healing process is ask for help, and there's a lot of help out there, and we often can feel alone, but we're really not, and it's really hard for us to ask for help. Some of us can be so independent, but like there are like miraculous things that can help us. And sometimes doing something that might seem less traditional, like having a soul retrieval or working in a way, sometimes we need just a little bit of that, and like you said, it can springboard us forward.
Yeah,
So
yeah. The other, it's what's kind of nice, and I appreciate this, and I've been on the planet for a while, so I've had a lot of different kinds of training, is that I can pluck from, these different things like shamanic healing, psychotherapy, EMDR, which is a process of another tool to help heal trauma. There's tapping, emotional freedom technique. There's, again, somatic, I call it somatic therapy. It's just easier to call it that, but it's working with the body, because that's what, we when we're under circumstances like that, where we've got we're, I don't like that term, but let's use it anyway, PTSD, that there's healing possibilities now, and it is available, and there are techniques to deal with the trauma that help you heal from it. And I want to say one piece about that I got from somatic experiencing, I thought was really, really important, and that's, you don't want to do it all at once. You don't want to be sitting, laying prone on the floor, or kneeling on the floor, pounding pillows, and screaming, and yeah, that gets it out for the time being. But until you have the capacity to accommodate the intensities, what'll happen, and what can happen, and I've seen it happen, is somebody will regress and go back to that state of feeling alone, dissociated, etc. A little bit at a time. Go forward and then go outside. Breathe in air. Do this, and then go hold your stuffed animal. Something. So you're going to balance that, or in dentistry, I think they used to call it titrate. You do a little bit and see how it goes, and then you do a little bit more if needed, et cetera, et cetera. I just want to make that point. That's critical, because I was one of those ones that would get people back in 30, 40 years ago, getting on the ground, get on the floor and beat the dickens out of the pillow. And it's very dramatic, and there is a part of me that's a drama queen, so I enjoyed the drama. But it was puzzling to me why someone then would cancel their next appointment.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's a perfect transition into what I'm going to talk about next. And that is, involving the body in healing. And that, for me, I grew up dancing. I was a dancer, and from a young age, and for me as a child, before I started ballet, when I would dance, that's where I'd feel spirit. Like, that was where I connected to spirit. So that's why my business is called Brave Dancing, because that's been the thread throughout my life. But I also knew I wanted to become a dance therapist, because I really love talk psychotherapy, and I think it's really needed. But I also think it needs to be coupled with inviting the body in. And so what I want to talk about now is, after I had that first session with you, we lived on opposite coasts. So I ended up working with you virtually, and I continued my work with you. And I did I think it was called the spiritual mentorship program, but I also did one-on-one work. And one of the things that you really did for me is a thing that I call limbic revisioning. So our limbic system, right? When I am working one-on-one with someone, or I am in a group, everyone in the group has their own energetic system. And we all can feel that and feel the differences from one and another. Now, for children who grew up in trauma, we can't read a book and repair certain things. So we often might see the example of a girl who grew up in an physically abusive home, and then she keeps choosing partners who physically abuse her. And she's like, I know I don't want to do this, but I keep finding myself doing this. And so for a lot of trauma survivors, we have these weird things that we do and we don't know why, And so one of the ways to break those patterns is that we need to shift what we can tolerate and what feels comfortable to us. So an example of that is, and there were some things in me that I could not shift by myself. I would read all day long and I couldn't shift it, right? So one of those pieces that we worked on together was, in the therapeutic container, whether it's one-on-one or group, the container is a place where you can play out the dramas of life. And if you have someone who has an energetic system and embodies safety, safe masculine energy, then you can play with what that feels like for you. And you did that for me. I did not grow up with any masculine, safe, fatherly energy at all. My dad was an alcoholic, and anyone who has been sexually abused by their father, to have a father sexualize you is very confusing and it's very damaging. And so what that really did for me was it caused me to shame and try to shut down any desire that I had for a connection to a father. So if I wanted to connect with a dad, or I really longed to have a dad be a part of my life, I would take knives and be like, you don't need that, and like try to kill the desire, So, so what I noticed in working with you is that you would hold the safe fatherly energy. And it was really uncomfortable for me, because whenever I'm in the presence of that, I often shake and I often cry. Like, that's the trauma leaving, and it's really embarrassing. So in everyday life, if someone comes up to me and holds that energy, I sometimes leave or push them away because I don't want to cry, I don't want to be embarrassed, right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
But in the therapeutic container, I didn't care if you saw me cry. I didn't care, I could do whatever, and it was wonderful to have that opportunity. And one specific thing that you did for me is I always had a desire that when I would date someone, that I would have a dad to go home and talk to about it, that if I felt rejected or the date didn't work out well or something, that I could go home and say, hey, Dad, this is how it went. I don't know why I always had that desire, but I did. And during our time that we worked together, I went through dating a couple different people, and I could bring it to the session. And you comforted me and you were like, let's talk about it. Was it good? Was it, like, what'd you do? And it was just something it was like a desire I had always had. And it was so wonderful to have a place to practice that and to do that. And I do believe that our work together did shift my tolerance for being around safer masculine energy. So.
Oh, that is, I call that heart medicine,
Yeah.
not in the physical sense, but heart medicine in the sense of love and appreciation. And thank you so much for that. It's sort of a side note to that. It's so interesting because I was at a couple of different conferences over the previous weekends, and I'm gonna cry here. But to receive that kind of acknowledgement, not an ego trip. It's not like, oh God, this great healer or whatever. I'm pretty darn good. I know that, but I don't. It's not. I'm not bragging about it. But to get that kind of feedback, for me, that's what it's about. Is to provide that kind of service, provide that kind of container, and also what you said about crying and shaking and such like that. Again, back to somatic, working with the body. And the titration I mentioned, releasing a little bit at a time. That's how one learns to accommodate some of these intensities and not have them covered with a veil of shame, which is really what is our protection, and growing up in that kind of crappy environment, where the story. So I appreciate that. Let me say that, number one. Second is the shaking and the crying. Good. And especially with a witness, and especially, as you pointed out, with a safe male, that gives you a different construct, for what's possible with a man, other than that wasn't there with your father. I think that's in part the father's role, not to look for perfection, but the father's role in a family is to provide that steadfast kind of sense of protectiveness. I know I don't mean to be dramatic, but again, I I get tears in my eyes, a slight tear. But if someone attempted to assault anybody in my family, or even a friend or another child, I'm a little, it's a little scary what I could do. It would bring out the warrior and the protector, strongly in a way that might not be pretty. But I know that. I just know that about myself. Don't mess with my kids. And I remember when my children, I've got two daughters now, adults, and I've got grandchildren and all that, but I remember at that time I just knew it. It was instinct. And thank God, that I knew where to draw the line. It's amazing to me. It's just sometimes, even let's say a girl that's going into puberty and the father says something, that has this little sexual tone to it, it freaks the girl out. You don't do that. It's okay to say, "Oh, you look very pretty," but leave it at that. Leave it at that. And I don't know if men are going to be listening to this. I hope so, but know how to contain. Learn how to contain. You can direct your sexual energy elsewhere. Yeah. Anyway, so back to what you were saying, I really appreciate.
Actually, I just want to interject before I forget, Stephen, of what you brought up. I know survivors need to hear that there is someone who feels rage about what happened to them, that there is someone that would be a warrior for them, that would, take extreme measure to protect them or to avenge them. And for many of us who were abused within our family, sometimes we look at the people that didn't abuse us, maybe a mother, maybe a father, sometimes the abuser is the female or is the mother, or
Sure.
whatever. But the family members who didn't abuse, because they are so involved in the dysfunction of the family, sometimes there's no rage there at all. And I know for me, I felt that. I remember talking to my mother and saying, "Why do you not have any rage? Like about what happened to your baby? Like, why do you have no rage?" And so we need to hear that from others, that others would feel so angry, because that's something that's really, I think, missing for a lot of those of us abused in families. We don't have someone who would take that stand for us. So it was kind of cool that you brought that in.
Yeah, yeah. I remember my youngest daughter, Catherine. God, she was probably 3 or 4, and I was driving to the market or something like that. And she said, might have been more like 4 or 5, somewhere in that range, 4 to 5 years old. And she said to me, "Dad, did you know there are mean people in the world?" And my heart stopped for a second, like there's a part of me that was going, "What? Who did what? What did they do to you? What happened?" And to my relief, she was talking about a friend who, a friend about her age that was mean to her. And I'm going, okay, good. No one, at least that wasn't what I immediately went to, but I could feel that protector come out and that rage, just that thread right there. So yeah, it's good to hear from you too, that to know that someone's pissed off to that degree. You know, let's not, let's take care of the children. Let's just do our best to take care of the children.
Absolutely. And my greatest cry, my greatest, if I could make a difference in the world, I would want to know, how do we break the cycle of this? Because, perpetrators and abusers aren't out there. They're here, they're among us, and I often wonder about, what does that rehabilitation look like? How do we really change this going forward? I don't know, but I do want you to speak a little bit on, ancestral healing. When we heal ourselves, we heal the generations going forward and back. And if you could just talk a little bit about how that works, that would be great.
It's pretty amazing, I think, Rebecca, that I remember a friend of mine who's psychic medium, we had a conversation about this, and she agreed, that when you do the healing, it goes forward and backward, to use her words, to quote her. There's years ago, I did, I won't say I studied, but I dipped into something called A Course in Miracles. And my biggest takeaway from that was one quote. And I think it says it all. When I am healed, I am not healed alone. When I am healed, I am not healed alone. And I remember that. I'm not even sure what else the course was about, but that was the takeaway, and that was big. So what we can do, education, just like what you're doing as a service, to provide information to others that could help them move forward. Second is, we're in a period of time right now where there's incredible possibilities for healing. I mentioned the soul retrieval, shamanic extraction. That's another one we won't go into a great deal, but sometimes the energy stays in the body, and shamanically, with the help with the guides, you can pull that out and give it to Mama Earth or Grandmother Ocean so that it can be transformed. EMDR, using eye movements, clicks, etc. That's very, very effective. I'm certified in that as well. Somatic experiencing, finding a practitioner like that can work with the body and be able to kind of ease you into it. Like I said, titrate, a little bit at a time, release, okay, good, and then change the subject, so that it feels safer again. So there's a chance and opportunity for the body to integrate it. Boy, I'm going off, aren't I? I'm going, what was the question? Anyway, sometimes I do that. I ramble. I apologize for that, but I do ramble a bit. Anyway, so the opportunities are here. Education, that's a big one right there. Learning more, like you said, you gobbled up a bunch of books, and that had a certain value to you, but there were other things you needed to do, as you discovered, doing things like Angela Sarian, she's ancestor, God bless her. I did a training with her, and she wrote a book called The Fourfold Way, F-O-U-R, Fold Way. Very brilliant teacher, and she puts things in fours. I love that. I can remember fours. But she said, has synthesized a lot of indigenous teachings, and she's put them into four. And she claimed that when you go to a shaman in an indigenous community, the shaman will ask you 4 questions. And depending on your answers, we'll give you the prescription. Here's the 4 questions. You're going to love this one. 1, when did you stop singing? And as the saying goes, sing as if no one's listening. I've been practicing that here in my little cubbyhole of an office at home. When did you stop singing? When did you stop dancing? When did you stop being enchanted by stories? When did you stop listening to the sweet sound of silence? And based on your answers to those, you would get a prescription as you would go out the door. Anyway, it's a great story. I think a great teaching, the 4 guidelines to the art of living. So there's and again, just I'll close with just a restatement of that, is there's so much available these days, just do a little research, poke around a little bit, ask friends, get a referral, etc. Whatever, if you go to see a therapist or a shamanic healer and your gut says no, give them their check or money or something, and then go somewhere else. Don't give up. Don't give up. It's beyond hope. I don't even want to say hope. It's possible, and you're stunning evidence of it, Rebecca, I might say. I've had my own story. I was not incested or sexually abused, but I've got my own story, and I've had to work through it over the years, to clear up a lot of stuff about abandonment, being invisible, etc. And obviously, I'm not being very invisible right now. So I think something has healed over the years, about that. 4th of 4 kids,
Yeah.
Anyway, so that's just, I don't want to go into it's not important, what's more important.
Actually, everything is. I mean, it really, it's good because it allows, I really wanted to bring you in today for my viewers to get a taste of you. And, when I wrote you to do the interview, I said, this is not a performance, and what I love about you is you are so down to earth and genuine. And, it was, I don't know, maybe just a week ago that I reached out to you, and I had tears in my eyes when I thought about reaching out to you, and And you've always felt, even though you were a practitioner, you also felt like a friend and like a soul ally. And so I just feel such gratitude for your soul coming in to participate today, for you saying yes, for your wife saying yes right away. It's like, and I just have felt so many animal guides around, all week, and so much help, so many helpers to prepare for our time. And and just thanks for all that your gifts have given to me in my journey.
I bless you. I appreciate that. I think that's another. I just did a podcast, and it was on gratitude, and so about 3 days beforehand, I'm really thinking about gratitude, appreciation, thank you, and just how it does raise the vibration. And that sounds like a mystical, new agey thing, but there are frequencies we operate at. And the interesting thing in my research, Rebecca, is that certain charts were available. I mean, tons of charts, on emotional frequencies, vibrational frequencies from high to low. And gratitude was just a few steps above love. So the more I think we practice that appreciation, really sincere appreciation, like what you just offered me, fills me up. It changes the other person's vibrational response as well. You know what I mean? So I encourage the listeners and whoever's watching this and listening to this, practice it. Go up to, I told a client I'm working with, it's a bit of a story, but I'll keep it short. Client I'm working with a family, and I saw the girl yesterday. She's, I think, 16 now. And her dad picks her up. And last time I saw her, her father said, well, can you tell her to let her papa know that she appreciates him? Kind of an odd thing to say, but okay. So I told the girl, I said, let's do this, go up to him and just say, I appreciate you, because he is one of those fathers that provides a safety for his two daughters, good man, good man. And so I did. I just said to her, it's up to you, but just say, I appreciate all you do for us. Simple. Oh man, that's like gold for the heart, Anyway, thank you so much.
Yeah.
I cannot say how much I appreciate that, doing this, and also what you said.
Yes. All right. So I guess we'll close this interview, and just sending lots of love and light to everyone out there. And thanks again, Stephen. Have a wonderful day.
You too. God bless, Rebecca, and thank you all.
Bye-bye.